The immense stretches of space extended, stars twinkling endlessly like uninterested onlookers, and a fleet of ships appeared from a far-off gas's shadow. Enormous, their silhouettes fading in. These were angular human ships, practical and much less advanced compared to the ships already in the air. Data opposite them on the Emperor's bridge, the flagship of the Tsar, the commander of the Zorthian Navy, noted the human arrival with disdain. In his command chair, he reclined, a smirk twisting on blue-scaled lips. He thought these people were almost comical. These primitives were bold enough to question the Zorthian armada's power. The Sleek was superior to their vessels, a strong vessel that drifted about him. Finally, they display themselves in graceful shapes, Tsar whispered his voice to himself. Filled with disdain, his second-in-command, Vlare, stood next to him and watched. Through the holographic, the human fleet display, they appear more like freight transporters as opposed to warships. Vlare chuckled, reflecting the scorn. Zor, his commander, a mocking chuckle. We could ruin them with just one volley, but where's the fun? Let's see how long they can wriggle before we smash them. Zorthian had controlled this area of the galaxy through centuries of conflict. Machines that were technologically superior developed to the point where few species even attempted to resist. Despite being different, the humans had endured. Their tale was rash, careless, and stupid enough to believe they could resist a superior force that had retaliated with nearly ridiculous tenacity every time. Their struggle had ended in the same way. Human fleets destroyed and burnt planets. Like insects, their survivors were dispersed. However, they were once more staging what Tsar believed would be their last futile act. The communication console was chiming. Commander breaking. Zor's reverie was interrupted. The human fleet is trying to launch a channel. Please allow them to speak, Tsar remarked, gesturing with his hand. Deepening amusement. What could they want? Perhaps make a request for mercy? Offer. The human concept of surrender. He was fascinated by a holographic desperation. On the bridge, the image briefly came to life. A person wearing a metal-studded uniform, his face, despite being hardened by time and experience, was determined and unafraid. Tsar anticipated Admiral Marcus Drake, the commander of the human fleet. Drake's voice cut through with firmness. Today is the last day of the blade-like stillness. We won't watch you passively devastate our worlds with your unrestrained time. Conquest is over. Tsar was unable to control a smirk. Admiral Drake, you sound very charming while flying rusted hunks in defiance of metal. Are you unaware of how unimportant you are? Your fleet is hardly more than rubble, waiting to occur. Drake's face remained unwavering. You've made one. But we might be outmatched, Tsar's voice responded mockingly. And what could that be, Tsar? The transmission cut off. The bridge was silent for a while. Tsar burst out laughing, a noise that reverberated across the main halls of the ship. In the air, the Emperor and his officers joined, dense with the mutual assurance of a species that had never experienced defeat. Vlare sneered at them. Underestimating them. Delusional. Tsar gave a partial nod. Hidden far below the surface of arrogance, he thought about what the Admiral had said. He swiftly brushed the idea of humanity aside. It had always exuded vain confidence. On the human side, this was the same. Admiral Drake of the flagship Resolute stood in his command center. His gaze remained focused on the massive Zorthian fleet ahead. It was enormous, and each ship was evidence of their technological prowess. They had taken over numerous worlds with weaponry that could completely transform ash planets. The human fleet, in contrast, appeared to be a remnant of a lost time period, but Drake seemed to know there might be something lying in wait. "Commander Ward!" Drake shouted, turning to face his second-in-command, Sarah Ward, a woman in command possessing a keen mind and nerves of steel. "Admiral," she said, looking at the different tactical readouts. Drake asked him if everything was ready. Ward nodded, her voice firm. The fleet is in position. They have no idea what's about to happen. Drake gave himself permission to take a moment. The Zorthian had experienced weeks of contentment, harassing the humans and forcing mankind into a corner. But they now possessed the component of surprise, and possibly their biggest advantage. The opponent could not see the weapon. But what was concealed? They believe we've beaten them, Ward said, her tone full of both tenacity and calm anticipation. They've previously considered us as easy prey. But this time we've got something, Drake said. Back on board, Zar observed that the human fleet was growing increasingly impatient. He grumbled as he stalled, most likely attempting to devise a desperate plan. Vlaire shrugged and asked if they should engage them. Zar, however, leaned forward and said, "Let's play. I want to spend a little more time with them." Completely recognized their futility. The Zorthian vessels started to shut down their armaments, rushing their pilots in anticipation of another quick and easy win. Meanwhile, human ships continued to exist, appearing ready for impact. Their faintly gleaming thrusters pierced the darkness of space. Then, as the Zorthian fleet was ready to unleash a barrage, Drake's voice changed abruptly, echoing through the command center. "Resolute, hold the line," he stated firmly. "We're not here to fight on their terms. They won't recognize what's about to happen." Ward looked at him, concerned. "Are you sure they'll fall for it, sir?" Drake grimly grinned and said, "They already have." The conflict over the Zorthian was already heavily favored in their direction, but to the humans, this was just the beginning, the start of the final game. Inside their ranks, no one could see it coming. Zorthian censors put their best foot forward. Silently, they sleeved the mothership and waited, prepared to alter the course of the fight. Space's silence was broken by the energy burst that caused the guns to fire in synchronized beams, dazzling flashes of red and blue ripping across the emptiness. The Zorthian fleet unleashed its full power. When the explosions flared on the human ships, they distantly staggered, flickering shields that eventually collapsed, flinging debris into the abyss. On board the Resolute, Admiral Drake stood, gripping the console. His gaze was fixed behind his back on each flashing red tactical display. A Zorthian spacecraft was approaching in the ideal arrangement of their firepower, methodically overpowering the human defenses. The blue markers signaled his own fleet growing smaller by the second as one after the other was extinguished. Shields were falling in the face of overwhelming odds. 30% remaining, Admiral Drake contacted Sarah, the command officer. Ward's tone was controlled and crisp. She clutched the console's edge, her eyes focused on the real-time battlefield scanning. "We can't take it any longer," she said. Drake clenched his teeth but didn't allow panic to show. "Hold the line while we buy time." Ward looked at him, aware of what he intended, but bearing the burden of their diminishing position. "Drake, we can't hold much longer." He nodded but remained silent, understanding the truth all too well. Superior ships, superior numbers, cutting-edge weaponry. The human fleet was destined to be reduced to molten slag. In contrast, the human ships were ancient artifacts, preserved by grit and resolve. They were no match for technological expertise, but Drake possessed something the Zorthian could not foresee, or mini-see. Gaining self-assurance every second, Emperor Zar experienced a shift in his level of ennui, entering the well-known excitement of conquering. He could possibly detect the fleet's collapse, their hesitancy and desperation. Everything was there. He leaned forward in his chair, savoring the moment. Commander Vlaire remarked in an enthusiastic tone, "Should we complete this? This last blow ought to be enough to destroy what's left of them." Zar pondered it for a while. He could put a stop to it immediately and remove the people from living amid a magnificent fire of devastation, but what role did sport play? No, he desired to see them endure a bit longer. He wanted them to realize that it wasn't all hopeless. Tsar smiled and said, "Let them see their impending doom. Make them understand just how superior we are." On the Resolute, Drake's tolerance was eroding. The flotilla held, but barely. The noose was being tightened by the Zorthians, and soon escape would be impossible. His gaze shifted toward Ward. "All ships, tighten formation," Drake commanded, his voice quiet but firm. "Focus fire on the Zorthian forward line. Make them put in the effort for this." Ward shared the command, and all human ships moved simultaneously. Gunfire crisscrossed the battleground, guided by precision, striking the Zorthian approach. For a moment, the strategy seemed effective. Zorthian vessels flinched from the focused assault, with smaller cruisers blinking out in rapid fireballs. Yet the Zorthian momentum quickly returned. They adapted, creating a new unbreakable barrier that absorbed the human assault with minimal damage. The number of human ships decreased every second. Ward whispered, her voice barely audible but brimming with frustration. "We're losing." Drake remained silent, understanding the grim reality. He glanced at the tactical clock. Only 2 minutes remained. Sensing victory, Tsar leaned forward. Blood rushed through him as he lifted a hand, indicating the final attack. "All ships, ready? 2!" Tsar's joyful command was interrupted. The Zorthian fleet's sensors detected a tremendous energy spike, far beyond human capability. Tsar's eyes widened. He stared at the readouts in disbelief. "Commander!" Vlair's frantic voice broke the tension. "Something's happening!" It appeared behind the formation, the shadow of the human mothership. The Zorthian fleet paused for the first time. Silence gripped the battlefield as the human mothership emerged from the depths of space, a colossal figure rising behind the remnants of the human fleet. The intimidating form of the Titan loomed over the battlefield. For a moment, all was still, as if the galaxy itself held its breath. On the Emperor's bridge, silence prevailed, as his commander